The first video, Introduction to Visual Representations of Imaging, What Makes a Great Mix, introduces you to our framework for displaying sounds visually. We'll map out how each piece of equipment in the control room affects imaging, the apparent placement of sounds between the speakers. We begin by mapping out the space between the speakers. Then we'll explain the mapping of sound to visuals. Once we have built a visual framework, we can then use it to explore all of the different types of mixes in the world. Then you'll have a good perspective on which to base your own values. The second video, Visual Representations of Studio Equipment, is an overview of the basic functions of each piece of equipment in the studio. Using the visuals, we will explore some of the most basic functions of reverb, delays, flanging, choruses, compression, and noise gates. Doing this serves a couple of purposes. First, you learn the basic functions of the equipment. Second, you get to know the details of mapping of audio functions to visuals, so that when we show mixes in real time, you can see them in more detail. Also, this will make it easier to explain subtle details in mixes. Now that we have visually mapped out all the equipment in the studio, in the third video, Musical Dynamics Created in the Control Room, we can now show how all of the equipment can be used together to create different styles of mixes. We can show the common structures of mixes used for different styles of music and different types of songs. Once you see all that can be done in the studio to create different types of mixes, it gives you a perspective on all the possibilities available. Hi, my name is David Gibson. I know everything about recording. I've been doing it since the beginning of time. Of course, this isn't true. No one knows everything about recording, because every session, every project is a completely new experience. It's kind of like life. You never know what you're going to get. We can only do the best with each situation. And who knows what the best is? There's no God of recording out there grading us. Therefore, I'm not here to tell you how to record a certain way. Each mix should be based on the song you're mixing. I'm not here to tell you how to mix like me. I'm here to help you to prepare yourself to handle the most unlikely type of situation possible. I'm not going to tell you the one way to mix. I want to show you different ways that people mix so you will have a choice. I'm here to help you do the most difficult job of all, to make art out of technology. My main goal is to give you a perspective on how it all works together, how you use technical equipment to create art. Then we will explore the different values that different people have for recording and mixing different styles of music and song.
Babe, come down.
This video is designed to teach you how to mix each and every style of music. Now, this is a grand task. We're not here to teach you our own values for what makes a great mix. We only want to give you a perspective on what is possible so you can be creative on your own. Each and every song is mixed differently based on the song and style of music. Therefore, we won't simply mix a song and say, this is the way it's done. Instead, what we'll do is point out the common values that different people hold for mixing different styles of music. Each style of music has developed its own traditions for the way it has been mixed throughout the history of recording. For example, big band music, heavy metal, acoustic jazz, even rap and hip-hop have developed certain traditions in the way they've been mixed. This video has been designed to answer that elusive question, what makes a great mix? And how do you go about creating a great mix? You see, the big question is, once you know what all the equipment in the studio does, how do you use it to create a good mix? After you know what the knobs do, which way do you turn them? We'll show you a framework for explaining what a good mix is. Then we will use this framework to see what professional engineers are doing in the songs we like and you like. With such a framework, we can develop our own values for what makes a great mix. This video is not meant to tell you how to mix a song a particular way, because a mix is dependent on so many variables. The song in all of its details, the style of music, and the people involved. Instead, this video is designed to give you a structural framework which you can use to categorize all of the different structures of mixes.
The structure of a mix. What a concept. Finally, someone's mapped out the underlying structure of what you can do in a mix.
Wow, did you hear what he said?
Yeah. You know, I know what I like, but I never know how to get it when I'm in the studio.
I had a good mix once, but I can never remember how I did it.
Check it out, man. I think he's on to something. The players know what's up, though, man. We know what's tight. Why can't we ever get it right in the studio, then?
Perspective. Wonderful. Finally, a perspective on everything that goes into recording and mixing.
Once you have this visual framework down, you can then begin to build your own perspective on how different songs are mixed. And once you start checking out the details of exactly what other engineers are doing, then you develop your own values as to what you like for each style of music.
All values are valid. The only possible evil is having no values at all.
We're not here to tell you you should mix things a certain way. We're here to help you develop and remember your own values. And we're here to do it visually, because visuals can help us to remember.
What did he say?
I forget.
Yeah, bring on the visuals. I like it when I can see what's happening. Many people are visually oriented.
Wow. The colors are great. This is the way learning should be.
A picture is worth 1,000 sounds.
In order to be able to explain and show different styles of mixes, let's map out how each piece of equipment affects imaging, the apparent placement of sounds between the speakers. Just about everyone has experienced the perception of sounds in a stereo mix as coming out of one speaker or the other, or somewhere in between the speakers. Now, if we pan a sound all the way over to the right, it's never going to come further right than the right speaker, right? But sometimes, you know, you hear it coming from other places in the room if you've got a really weird room or if the walls are strange. But in a studio, you would never hear it further right of the right speaker. Now, if we pan it to the left, no matter how far you pan it to the left, it will never sound further left of the left speaker. Some people think it's only going to sound this far left. Some people see it a couple of inches or even a foot further left of the left speaker. So therefore, we can draw boundaries just to the left of the left speaker and just to the right of the right speaker. So panning is mapped out as left to right. When I turn the pan pot here, you can hear the sound pan from left to right and from right to left, like that. Now, we're not talking about reality here. Now, we're not talking about reality here because, you see, there's actually no sound between the speakers. The reality is the sound comes out of the speakers in waves, travels through the molecules into the room, hits the walls in the room, and it also hits your ears and your body. This is one way we perceive sound. Another way we perceive sound is we imagine it to be between the speakers. This is called imaging. It's a figment of our imagination. You see, when we hear a sound between the speakers, there's no sound really there. The truth is, the same sound's just coming out of both speakers, and we imagine the sound to be between the speakers. It's just a figment of your imagination, like an audio-optical illusion. Also, you know when you hear a sound in the middle of your head when listening to headphones? Well, there's no sound there. Your brain's there. Cool. Even if you are asleep, sounds still hit your body and it affects you. On the other hand, if you aren't paying attention to a mix or if you're off to the side of the speakers, you don't hear imaging. When you're asleep, imaging does not exist. In fact, they've done studies of people who don't hear imaging because of the shape of their ears or because of the shape of their minds. Imaging is a figment of our imagination. In fact, there is no imaging in the forest. Different people relate to sound in these two ways. Many people just feel the sound and perceive the music that way. Other people actually see the imaging between the speakers. Recording engineers are often obsessed by these dynamics that go on in this imaginary world of imaging. Now, let's continue with our mapping of mixing functions into the visual world. What about faders or volume controls? As you have probably noticed in some mixes, some sounds are right out front, normally vocals and lead instruments, while other instruments like strings and background vocals are often in the background. We'll map out volume as a function of front to back. This makes sense because louder sounds are normally closer to us, and softer sounds are commonly further away. Also, if we want to sound like a vocal to be out front in a mix, what do? Turn it up! Right. If you want something out front, turn it up. If you want something in the background, turn it down.
I guess that's why they call them background vocals.
Although volume is the number one function of front-to-back placement, there are other pieces of equipment or factors that make sound seem more upfront, such as compressor limiter, boosting EQ in the mid-range or high-frequency range, short delays of less than 30 milliseconds, that's fattening, and any effect that makes a sound unusual, so that it sticks out. On the other hand, reverb and long delay times tend to make sounds more distant.
Well, distant thunder could be miles behind the speakers, right? However, this illusion is created from our past experience of thunder. Normally, we don't seem to hear sounds more than a short distance behind the speakers. Normally, background vocals and strings are only a few inches behind the speakers, right? Well, check it out around your own speakers. Different people do disagree as to how far behind the speakers they hear the sounds. Who am I to say your imagination sucks? Now, no matter how loud you make a sound in a mix, sounds will never seem to come from more than a short distance from in front of the speakers. No matter how loud you turn up the sounds will never come from here, and sounds will never come from behind you.
Unless you have a 3D sound processor.
Yeah, but that's a whole nother world and video.
This distance we imagine a sound to be in front of or behind the speakers is based on a couple of factors. First, the larger the speaker, the further in front the sound appears to be. Small studio speakers about 6 inches, a huge PA that's about 10 feet, or a boombox that's just 2 or 3 inches. The second factor that determines the difference in the way people perceive the limits of imaging from front to back has to do with the fact that some people have a more active imagination than others.
Now, one day, I noticed that high frequencies appear higher between the speakers, and low frequencies appear lower. Bells, cymbals, and strings seem to be right about here, whereas bass guitars and kick drums seem to be right about here. Check it out on your own system. Play a song and listen to where high-frequency sounds seem to be and where low-frequency sounds seem to be between the speakers. Most people agree highs are higher and lows are lower. That's probably why they call highs high and lows low. There are a number of reasons why this illusion exists. First of all, tweeters are often higher than woofers. But also, low frequencies come through the floor to your feet. High frequencies never come through the floor. Some studios are even calibrated as to exactly how many low frequencies come through to your feet. Another reason, though, is that we've got a low frequency resonator here, boosting the low frequencies, and we've got a high frequency resonator here, boosting the high frequencies. Singers, when they learn how to sing, are often taught, if they want to bring out the lows, sing from down here. Okay? So we have lows here, highs here. On a more esoteric level, there are energy centers that have been mapped out in the Far East. These energy centers are called chakras. They correspond to different frequencies in our body. At the base of our spine, they say it's 40 hertz. Around here is maybe around 800 hertz, 1,000 hertz, 5,000 hertz. Well, I don't want to say whether this is real or not, but at any rate, it helps explain why we very likely have called low frequencies lows. Regardless of why it happens, the truth of the matter is that high frequencies do seem to appear higher between the speakers than low frequencies. Therefore, we'll put the high frequencies up high, and we'll put the low frequencies down low in all of our visuals. Now, no matter how high the frequencies in a sound, they'll never come from higher than the speakers themselves. I mean, they never come from the ceiling, right? You see, imaging is limited to the top of the speakers. Now, since bass frequencies come through the floor, the lower limit is down here, the floor, where the floor is. So check it out. No matter how far we pan the sound to the left, it's only going to go about this far. It's going to be a little bit in front of the speakers, a little bit behind the speakers, and to the top of the speakers. Then all the way across to the top, a little bit front, a little bit behind, down to the floor, all the way to the right speaker, about right here. Okay? So you can imagine this three-dimensional space right there. Now, this is a limited space between the speakers where a mix occurs. It only happens in this space right here. Therefore, if you have a whole lot of instruments, it's going to be crowded. Say you got a 100-piece orchestra. You put 100 instruments between these speakers and there's hardly any room, so it's hard to differentiate between every single sound. Whereas you put 3 violins between the speakers, and you can hear every one completely separate from each other, because there's only so much space between the speakers here where you can create a mix. Therefore, the whole issue becomes that of crowd control.
The ranges of control that an engineer has are the same as those of the sculptor. Both are working in 3 dimensions.
We have now mapped out the space between the speakers where imaging occurs. This is a stage or palette where we can create different structures of mixes. Now let's discuss the elements that we can place between the speakers. Years ago, I started out with a dot on my Macintosh in the program Mac Paint. I figured if I moved the dot left and right, it was like panning. However, after a while, I realized that you can commonly have 2 sounds in the same spot between the speakers and still hear both of the sounds. Therefore, I got a 3D program so that I could make the images be see-through or transparent. Now, using the equipment in the studio, we can place any sound anywhere in the 3D stereo field with volume faders, pan pots, and EQ. With panning, we can move a sphere left and right. With volume, we can move the sphere front to back. With equalization, we can move the sound up and down, at least a little bit. Of course, no matter how much bass we add to a piccolo, we'll never be able to get it to rumble the floor. And we won't be able to put a bass guitar in the sky. But if we are mapping out pitch as a function of up and down with EQ, we can raise the sound up or down at least a little bit. So, as you see, we can place the sound anywhere between the speakers in 3D with volume, panning, and EQ. Now, the whole goal here is to show how much space each sound takes up between the speakers, so we can deal with the big problem of masking. Just how big is each sound in this world of imaging? This is important because sometimes one sound will hide another sound when they are in the same place. Therefore, if this is a limited space between the speakers, we need to know how big each member of the crowd is, right? First, bass instruments seem to take up more space between the speakers, so we make them big. Think about it. Put 3 bass guitars in a mix, and what do you have?
Hip-hop?
Yeah, but in any other style of music, you end up with Mud City. I mean, you put 3 bass guitars in a mix, and it fills up the space between the speakers completely. On the other hand, put 10 bells in a mix, and even if they're all playing at the same time, you can hear every single one individually. Because bass instruments are bigger in the world of image, and they mask other sounds more, They hide other sounds in a mix, especially when turned up loud. Also, louder sounds will appear larger because of perspective. This also rings true because louder sounds do mask other sounds more. A guitar that is extremely loud in a mix will tend to mask the other sounds more than if it were soft in the mix. Besides round spheres, we also have oblong spheres. This is an unusual effect that happens when we put a delay on a sound less than 30 milliseconds.
1,000 milliseconds equals 1 second.
When you have a delay longer than 30 milliseconds, you hear an echo like this. However, when you have a delay less than 30 milliseconds, our ear is not quick enough to hear the difference between the two sounds, so we only hear one sound, one fat sound. When you place the original signal in the left speaker, then put the delayed signal in the right speaker, it's as if it stretches the sound between the speakers. It doesn't put the sound in a room like reverb. It just makes it omnipresent between the speakers. Just as volume, panning, and EQ can be used to place and move spheres, we also have control over the placement of this line of sound created by fattening. We can place the line anywhere from left to right using pan pots, up front or in the back using volume, or even move it up or down a little bit with EQ. When we place reverb in a mix, we are placing the sound of a room in the space between the speakers. A room, being three-dimensional, is shown as a three-dimensional see-through cube between the speakers. Again, with reverb, we can place it anywhere in the 3D stereo field using panning, volume, and EQ. We now have defined and visualized the basic tools that an engineer uses to sculpt this three-dimensional space between the speakers, spheres, lines, and rooms. With them, the engineer can design a wide range of structures ranging from sparse mixes to full mixes, to asymmetrical mixes, to symmetrical mixes, to a mix with a lot of movement. As previously mentioned, the art of mixing is the creative placement and movement of these sound images. Just as a musician needs to explore and become thoroughly familiar with all of the possibilities of his or her instrument, so must an engineer be aware of all possible musical dynamics that the equipment can create. And he or she must be adept at coming up with any structure of mix that can be conceived. Mixes can be transparent or invisible. Some styles of music have traditionally been made to be invisible so you don't hear the mix, like acoustic jazz, bluegrass, or folk music. On the other hand, the mix could be quite visible. In some styles of music, engineers often use the equipment in the studio to create musical dynamics. The mix is utilized almost like another instrument in the song. Regardless of the style of music, the one thing we can all agree on is that the mix should be appropriate for the song. The mix should fit the song like clothing suits your personality. The mix can be used as a tool to enhance the song and highlight certain aspects, or it can be used to create tension or chaos when appropriate. Regardless of how it fits, the mix should fit the style of music and song in some way. The creative engineer pushes the limits of what has already been done. Now that we have defined the space between the speakers where imaging occurs, and now that we have outlined some of the basic parameters of sound visually, the big question is, what makes a great mix? And how do you obtain it? Well, in order to answer this question, we need to figure out what can be done in a mix in the first place. The first question is, what tools do we have to make different types of mixes? What are the tools we have to create the dynamics an engineer creates? Well, as previously shown, we have volume, panning, EQ, and effects. These are the tools you use to create a mix. Now, there are many other things that contribute to a great recording that can be refined during the recording session. These dynamics of the song include concept, melody, harmony, rhythm, the lyrics, the song structure, the arrangement and instrumentation, the band's performance, and the quality of the recording and the equipment. The mix is only one aspect of a recorded piece of music. All of these other aspects must be at least okay at a basic level of good quality. The mix can be used to hide some of the weaker aspects, but there's only so much you can do.
Tools are their best when they're invisible. Focus on the hammer, hit your finger. Look at the steering wheel, crash the car. Stare at the knobs, screw up the mix. Get lost in the equipment, so much for the art. You know what I mean. You can't see the forest through the trees. It is the music that counts, not the equipment. Learn your tools well, so you can get past them into the beauty of the music at hand.
So what makes a great mix?
You know, the bad mix. It's just happening. You feel it. It's there.
Yeah. Well, I like a mix where things are overlapping and like once in a while some things just seem to bubble up and peek their heads through.
I like a full perspective. I want to see small next to big, clarity next to fullness, emotion next to thought form. I want to see a full perspective.
So what makes a great mix?
When you play it anywhere, it sounds good.
So when it's booming, it's all that.
That's the one.
A great mix is full of cool effects. Something happening every moment.
It's true. One person's heavenly mix is another one's hell, and vice versa.
It takes all types for the world to go around. You know what I mean?
Yet, throughout all mixes, there are certain values that are commonly held. We don't like muddiness, at least not for too long. And we don't like too many irritating frequencies. Even punk rockers have their limits. And we like our highs, high frequencies that is. There are similar values that have come to be commonly accepted for each style of music. For example, in big band music, if you turn up the kick drum too loud, they'll kill you. Likewise, if you don't turn up the kick drum really loud in heavy metal and rap, they'll kill you too. But still, within each style of music, there are people that have differing opinions as to how the mix should be. Some people do it the opposite of what is normal, just to be different. And about the only thing that anyone can agree on in this business is that the mix is appropriate for the style of music and appropriate for the song and all of its details.
Just as the song dictates the mix, it is the personality of the entity that dictates the way it is clothed.
It is the way that the equipment relates to the song that makes a great mix. The function of all this technical equipment is to enhance the music in some way. Songs have many dynamics in them, spanning the entire range of perception, from feelings and emotions to thought forms, physical reactions, visual imagery, spiritual connotations, and cultural connotations. There's a wide range of possible dynamics that music evokes in different people. The mixing board and all of the equipment in the studio can also create musical dynamics that also affect us in similar musical ways. The art of mixing is the way in which the dynamics we create with the equipment in the studio interface with the dynamics apparent in songs. Making the relationship of these dynamics work is the art of the recording engineer.
So it's all about relationships.
The first video in the series was designed as an introduction to our visual framework for representing sounds in a mix. In this video we have covered, and you've learned, that we perceive sounds in a mix two ways. One, we feel the sound waves hitting our ears and our body. Second, we imagine the sounds between the speakers. This is imaging, the apparent placement of sounds between the speakers. We also learned about the limits of imaging. First, you normally don't hear sounds further left or right of the speakers themselves. Second, you don't hear sounds more than a couple of feet in front of or behind the speakers. And you don't hear sounds much higher than the speakers themselves, but we do hear sounds come through the floor. We also learned that this is a limited space between the speakers. When you have a lot of sounds in the mix, they fill up the space, causing masking. With only a few sounds in the mix, there's plenty of room and they sound clearer. Therefore, it all becomes a function of crowd control. We also learned that you can move sounds around in this three-dimensional space between the speakers with panning, volume, and EQ. Then, we discussed delays and how you can stretch the sound between the speakers, making it fatter, although it does take up more space in the mix. We discussed reverb and how it takes up a ton of space between the speakers and how it can be moved around in the mix. Then, we gave you an introduction of what is to come in future videos as we briefly discussed different structures of mixes. We discussed how the mix should fit the style of music and the details of the song. And we ended by showing how the dynamics that we can create with the technical equipment relate to the dynamics found in the music itself.